You will have seen comments made in Moscow today that the Russians are apparently not happy with the state of cooperation on the ceasefire violations, the state of cooperation between them and you guys. And it was said this morning that starting tomorrow, unless the cooperation improved, the Russians were going to go ahead and unilaterally take action against people who are violating the ceasefire. What's going on here? Do they have a point?
No. In short, they don't. I mean, there has been coordination already, as we talked about, through the ceasefire task force in terms of working through being able to collect and analyze information about violations. So there has been coordination, and so I mean, these things have been discussed at length, and they continue to be discussed in a constructive manner. This idea of looking at the cessation of hostilities and potential violations to it. I'd also say the statement that that we saw quoted to a Russian general that will act unilaterally runs counter itself to the spirit of the cessation of hostilities agreement, which everybody agreed to, as you know, back in February. Our expectation is that Russia will refrain from unilateral actions and respond to our counter proposal on the modalities for implementing the cessation of hostilities agreement. So there has been dialogue back and forth. Therefore, no reason for anybody to say that there needs to be unilateral action taken.
What's the counter proposal?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but we have been talking at quite some length with Russian officials about how to manage the cessation going forward.
Well, to your knowledge, has there been any action taken against people who have violated the cessation of hostilities?
You mean like sort of legal action?
Well, any kind of action, whether it's military, legal, calling them out.
I'm not aware of any specific
naming names.
I'm not aware of any specific action to date.
Right.
I would remind you, though, that the cessation still is holding now, going into its fourth week.
Well, right, but that there have been violations, and you've talked about them. So you're saying that and they were last week, I believe. So you're saying that there hasn't been any action of any kind, whether it's military or legal or otherwise.
If you're asking about a repercussion as a result of a violation, I'm
Right.
not aware of any specific repercussions. That's not ruling things out in the future, but there is a process here by which these modalities are discussed and coordinated.
Well, I'm trying to find out what that process is, because the Russians don't seem to be happy with it. And
I can get you a primer on it. I'd rather not get into the whole details, but we do have, there's a pretty lengthy structure, a process to how these things are collected and looked at, and we can get you somebody to explain that to you in greater
Well, it's
detail.
not so much the collection and the looking at that I'm interested in, it's the response. Who decides what gets done to whom if a violation has been confirmed?
Yeah, we'll get you a primer on the process. We'll get you a primer on the process. But as I said, Matt, it's this idea that we're not having a dialogue with the Russians on this, that there is no coordination on monitoring the cessation, is simply not borne out by the facts.
Can I follow up on the issue of violations? Okay, somebody must be keeping a tally on violations, correct? You must have a tally that so many violations have taken place in this area or that area. How are they likely to compromise the cessation of hostilities or jeopardize the cessation of hostilities? You must have that, right?
The task force is collecting, or has been collecting, reports of violations to the cessation of hostilities. And that is all being brokered through the task force. Obviously, we don't. The right number of violations is 0. We don't want to see any. The cessation of hostilities continues to hold, even despite the reports of violations. And as I said before, I'm not going to get into, a discussion of each and every claim or allegation of a violation.
Can you tell us whether it's the Syrian government forces are responsible
Well,
for
I
the
think
majority of those violations?
yes, as we've said before, I mean, by and large, the greatest number of reported violations have come from the regime.